Good afternoon, everyone. It is great to see faces on here today to celebrate our Juneteenth event. On behalf of the Village Demand, we just want to thank you so much for coming out to spend this afternoon with us. We promise that you're going to leave empowered, and we're hoping when our keynote comes on that we have a conversation around the topic that she's going to be presenting to us today. So without further ado, I would like us to start our program today, and Ms. Keisha Smith is going to lead us off in terms of some Zoom equity, just how we should behave on Zoom in general. Apologies for the tongue tie this morning, but very excited to be here and to see everyone. So I'll hand it over to Lakeisha.
Thank you. Everyone, again, welcome here, and just wanted to talk about some of the housekeeping. So this session is being recorded, and we wanted to make sure that you are aware of that. And you can contact the Village Demands at gmail.com to get a copy of the recording or visit the YouTube channel for the Village Demands. We also do have closed captioning available. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see an option that says CC and either closed caption or live transcript underneath. And if you click that, you would get the transcript for today's event. And then question and answer. If you have any questions of any of our presenters, please make sure to use the Q&A function in the Zoom toolbar. And then of course, we would love to have you share with us and be community with us using any of the hashtags that you see on the screen. So either hashtag the Village Demands or hashtag TVD Juneteenth. Thank you.
Thank you, Lakeisha. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Dr. Regina Stanback-Strout, who is going to give us our welcome and our open statement and just, kick us off with a big bang. So Dr. Stanback-Strout, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So on behalf of the Village Demands, the statewide coalition on Black American affairs, I want to welcome you to this celebration of Juneteenth. Now, the Village Demands is a local chapter of the Western Regional Council on Black American Affairs, which is a region of the National Council on Black American Affairs, which is an affiliate of the American Association of Community Colleges. So all of you at your institutions have recently received invitations for them to have institutional membership with us. We're committed to impacting the experiences of Black people on the campuses and the success of Black students. So we're celebrating Juneteenth as is heralded as this the day that the federal troops arrived in Galveston, Texas, to free the still enslaved people, despite the fact that slavery had been legally ended 2 years earlier. But the question that we'll pose to you today is, has it really been ended? Because now in our current Constitution that there's so much of a love and commitment to, mass incarceration or slavery is spoken to in the 13th Amendment. And in the 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution, it provides that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, where the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to its jurisdiction. So that's a real important part for you to think about as you hear the message today, because the conviction of a crime and the relegation to the criminal justice incarceration system, the complex, is justification and constitutionally the reason that you can enslave people. And so when you think about that complex and the disproportionate enslavement of Black people in that complex, then you get to put that together and ask, really, has slavery been ended? And we continue to experience the ongoing explicit legally sanctioned efforts to imprison and enslave Black people. The intentionality in doing so is more than alarming. It is a strategic, intentional focus on moving Black people in to support the prison industrial complex, and understand that that's an economic interest, just like slavery was an economic system. So by criminalizing, they do so by criminalizing the Black youth and the Black person's experience. So it wasn't that long ago, no, the systems and the foundations and the structures and the impact of slavery and the penultimate representation of white supremacy and the hierarchization of the social construction of race to denigrate and relegate people of African descent to the lowest positions and opportunities in society. So we celebrate this federal holiday, but we remain focused on the fact that slavery has not ended. And with that, I want to invite you to have a very informative dialogue to receive the brilliance of the scholarship and the contributions that are going to be made before you today, and to be ever vigilant in your roles and responsibilities and sphere of influence in making sure that we are able to mitigate the impact of slavery, and at some point mitigate slavery altogether in these United States. And thank you very much for the opportunity to make these opening comments.
Thanks, Dr. Stambeck-Stroud, for kicking us off with today's event, and just remembering to have, for us to continue to have these dialogue as we go through, not just today alone, but something that we could bring back to our campuses as well. So I would like to introduce us to Dr. Jamal Cooks, who is currently the Vice President of Academic Services at Chabot College, and he is going to lead us today in our libations. So Dr. Cooks.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Jamal Cooks, and I serve as the Vice President of Academic Services at Chabot College. But who I am, other than that, or at the core of that, is I'm a husband, I'm a father, a servant leader, a track coach, a brother, an uncle, a mentor to some, and a friend to many. So we always have to make sure that we acknowledge who we absolutely are in our spaces. And I have the honor and pleasure to do libations for this wonderful Juneteenth event. Libations are very important in our history. Libation is a process of remembering, of reconnecting or connecting, not only to the spirit, but everything around us. We pour libations to connect with all that is clean and in our hearts. The act of pouring libations, you see, is the process of pouring or giving a sacrifice to form a connection with the world and the spiritual realm. Now, this is not spirituality in terms of this is a religion, Baptist or Catholic or any of that. It's not a denomination. This is spirituality as the state of establishing and maintaining relationships. So when we pour libations, we're opening ourselves as well as the group to the ashe of the entire universe. And the word ashe is a very important word. It's from the Yoruba culture, in which the Yoruba of Nigeria conceive the power to make things happen and produce change. Now, it's not just in Yoruba, and in African cultures. China, they call it chi. Japan, they call it kai. In India, they call it prana. The word is generally used in any of these contexts to represent the phrase, so be it, or it is so. And it is used in some places to take the place of the word amen. And so normally, if we were in person, I would ask the elder of the room to give us the approval to be able to move forward. But because we're in this particular online Zoom context, I won't do that. But I am going to say that when we do this libation, we have to we do it with audience participation. So we have the plant here, right? And with the plant, I'm going to use water, and I'm going to pour it into the plant. And so the water represents the ashe of the room, the good vibes, the positive energy in the room. And the plant represents the people, the community, us in this particular space. And that through this libation process, we'll be able to it'll be plentiful, it'll be positive, and it'll be great and an asset for everyone here. So as I pour the water into the plant, whether you are muted or unmuted, I ask you to join with me saying Ashe. Ashe. So when we do libations, and in the presence our all most powerful, all knowing, and all present creator, by whatever name you may call this creator, we pour and we say, Ashe.
Ashe.
We pour for our celestial ancestors known in different cultures by many different names. Some they are known as Orisha, to some they are known as Naturu. To some angels, we pour out for them, Ashe.
Ashe.
Those that existed in captivity, our ancestors who were enslaved, who were going through the Middle Passage, at the bottom of the boats, of the ships, hungry, dirty, tired, not knowing what the next day was going to hold. We even had some of our ancestors who were so angry, so defiant against slavery that they chose to throw themselves overboard because they did not want to be enslaved, because they knew that they were from kings and queens and that they ran civilizations long before their captors came to their land to steal them. And so for those ancestors who died during the Middle Passage, we say, Ashe.
Ashe.
We pour for our ancestors that fought the good fight. They were freedom fighters, and for what they stood for in terms of once the Emancipation Proclamation came, and then it was legally, and we can go on and on about all of this, but legally slaves were free. We had lots and lots of people that fought for freedom. If you will, feel free to call the names of any of our historical ancestors. Booker T. Washington. Harriet Tubman. Yes, you can put it in the chat. Yep. Rosa Parks. For these freedom fighters, for these people that continued to bleed, to die, and put their lives on the line for us, we say, Ashe. To our personal ancestors, those who gave birth to us, to our family members, those that were with us, that preceded us, and now they have gone on with the ancestors, feel free to call their names. My parents, John Cooks, Neil Cooks. Michael Gary. Charles Gary. For these personal ancestors who nurtured us, who taught us, who loved us, please continue to say their names as we move forward. We pour and we say, Ashe.
Ashe.
We pour to welcome the present moment. We salute the power of this particular moment with all of us in this particular space. And we salute the ever-present now. We pour and say, Ashe. We pour for our future generations. We remember them now and build for them so that they can one day pour for us. We say, Ashe. We pour to the seven directions, to west, to north, to east, to south, to up, to down. We pour for the center, which there dwells in each of us. We pour and we say, Ashe. We pour for the five elements. We pour for the fire, for the earth, the air, the water, and the life, that they will all combine to make us and our future generations great. And we say, Ashe. We pour for each individual here, and any issues that you would like to share or feel, please, you can put those in the chat, you can shout them out. And which brings us back to where we started. We began with the Creator, we began with Ashe, and we will end with the Creator and pouring three times. And we shall say, Ashe,
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 Ashe.
Ashe.
Thank you.
Shay, thank you. So I have the pleasure of introducing today Miss Allie Jones. Allie Jones is a self-care advocate, writer, artist, and Creole mermaid. She is co-founder and director of Black Freight Press, a revolutionary press committed to exploration of liberation using art to transform consciousness. She is founder of Bodacious Bombshells, a wellness collective in Oakland. Allie is a yoga instructor, passionate about centering our breathing, work as sacred, and hopes to build a legacy of awareness and expression. Allie graduated with her MFA in creative writing and literature from Mills College. She received her MPA from the Millbury Institute of International Study and her BA in cinematic arts and technology from CSU Monterey Bay, and a minor in creative writing and social action. Allie is the host of a podcast, which I recommend that you all check out. It's called Chit Chat with Allie Cat. She explores self-care practice and journeys of self-love in community. Allie, welcome.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me and for the libations and for us really calling in our ancestors. I just wanted to bring us into a deep breath together. And so just want to call everyone wherever you are, just to take a deep breath in and let it out. Really holding honor to that sacred breath. We're going to do 2 more breaths. Take a deep breath in and then let it out. And y'all, I can't hear or see you. So this last breath, you can make as much noise as you need to, right? Releasing whatever energy is inside. So take a deep breath in and let it out. This piece is called Sirène Uprising. I don't want to remember my life before mermaids. I was raised by saltwater queens, blessed by magical beings of mythic proportions, daughters of Yemeya and Gumbo. Those who remind me of the beautiful resilience that lives within us, coiled crowns adorned with cowrie goddesses who maintain the grace of a gazelle with the ever-changing tides, mes sirènes, my mermaid queens, flowing, crashing, rising. My grandma Genevieve, cayenne pepper royalty, celestial matriarch, soft, yet steady as a metronome in the kitchen with a laugh that could brighten any dim room. Unafraid of what is to come because her certainty is founded in love. Her setbacks created the beginning of her greatest comebacks, flowing through the roughest currents and remaining strong, flowing, crashing, rising. Mother Teresa, calming like rosemary and gentle as gardenia's earth warrior, who taught me to respect and protect the earth, to value all forms of life, holding space for her softness and her offspring, unconditionally magical, conjuring potions that transform the flu into a slight sniffle, or inventing the perfect bedtime story. She grew in the midst of adversity, never allowing fear to stop her pursuit, crashing against every judgment or expectation with determination, flowing, crashing, rising. Mes sirènes, my mermaid queens, cousins who remind me that I could do anything, sisters that challenge me to seek softness in times of pain and trauma, to look at myself in a mirror untarnished by self-loathing. My aquatic angels, who kept me sane when all I thought I could ever be was crazy. Loving with our hearts wide open, guided by our gut feelings and our star signs, rêveurs, croyants, amants, et guerriers, dreamers, believers, lovers, and warriors, rising above black holes of doubt, insecurities, and fear, flowing, crashing, rising. Whew. So that was my first piece, y'all. And I want to just call in, I love that we called in, our warrior ancestors. And for me, this next piece is for my grandma Genevieve, who's one of my warrior ancestors, daughter of Louisiana sharecroppers. And so I want to just uplift her in this space. And this piece is called Genevieve. La plupart de ma cœur, elle était, elle est toujours la plupart de ma vie, ma cœur, me. I'm grateful for my grandma Genevieve, a daughter of Louisiana sharecroppers, no middle name, several last names, 5 daughters, 1 in heaven, lost in a chance, ready to dance, the best cook in our family. She was young, wild, and free before it was a thing to be, dedicated to her family, laughing uncontrollably, cleaning houses every day just to make a way for us. 40 years. No limits to her love. She grew energy from above. So below, we were able to flow, grow, and go. She taught me to appreciate everything. Never about cars and bling, garden plots, and recipes. The very best of me. She taught me how to love, feel, and heal. There will never be another like my mother's mother. There will never be enough words on toutes les langues to describe her magnanimous presence, the essence of love and light. We will be all right, even on our darkest days, because she found a way. I was there the day her life changed, all of her plans rearranged on the bedroom floor. La plupart de ma cœur. Elle était, elle est toujours la plupart de ma cœur. And so this next piece is us calling in. I do a lot of work with young Black girls, Black and brown girls, and I want us to just call in more space for us to see them, to hold them, to see them as human, you know? They're adultified so quickly. So I just want to call us as we are here, we're thinking about ancestors too, thinking about 7 generations in both ways, right? And so how are we holding space for young Black girls? This piece is called Truth or Dare. I dare you to see, Black girls. Witness the almond-colored triumph in our eyes to recognize Black girls beyond the colonizer lies. I dare you to release instant gratification and exploitation. Our pain cannot be fixed with a Band-Aid. Black girls are not a gas station or a shopping mall. We are short and fat and thin and tall, wilting and blooming. So much more than the eye can see. We wear crowns that can get heavy. I dare you to hold space for Black girls who bloom in a drought. Black girls who ask too many questions and don't learn from our mistakes. From the sweetest sunflower to the thorniest rose, I dare you to embrace Black girls falling apart in front of you, who are too loud, too fast, and have an attitude. Black girls with beads and barrettes and scars we can't forget. I dare you to be courageous, to stand up and love Black girls who could use a hug or two, deserving of care and adoration. Granny, teacher, sister, auntie, I dare you to stop saying this ain't your problem, to stand up and fight, to be the glimmer of light. Mama, mentor, nurture the mending. You are a mirror of joy and reflection. I dare you to protect Black girls. Shine brighter than the storms you face, to be a lighthouse when the fog rolls your way, to move with deliberation and grace. Indelible. When a sparrow cries, a soul flies silently. In the greenish pastures, covered by warm rays beaming, hummingbirds stand still in observance, in reverence for the stars that no longer burn, with the light that never fades. Generational grief in my bones. Hope, that phrase, dismembered memory. Unspoken knowing in my hair, we say so much more. Shouting wild, vision blurred, the simulations tilting, the matrix shifting. Artifacts shrill of sacrifice, cloudy countenance. Regret creeps up your eardrum, steady and resounding. White noise tingles straight to the temporal lobe. I hope you dance and sing les chansons de joie et d'amour profonde. Pas de soucis, pas de larmes, rien qu'une souris qui allume. J'espère que tu vas bien, même si vous ne savez pas comment. In this last piece, I really want to call back in our warriors and really thinking about how we think about mental health in this space of incarceration, in this space of this pipeline, right? How we think about the Black mental health. And really that myth of strong Black women and really calling in our warrior energy, but a space for us to really sit with each other and be in more of a space of community care. This piece is called Black Girl Soldier. Our first general was underground. Railroads couldn't compare to the depths of her mind. On a mission with a vision, precision with the darkest caves covered by branches. Branches isolated by shame no matter where we go, the darkest storms. Uprooted Black bodies, we continue to hide how we feel inside. Not equal, not well. What is being? The blood that drops, my heart that stops beating, beating emotions and strength from this Black vessel, gasping for air, craving help, someone to care, anyone, see that you are not invincible. Sold and conditioned, hanging on by a noose with no room to break loose from the labels you didn't ask for. Martyr complex, struggling to catch your breath under waters of expectation, bury your pain to survive. They can't relate, dissociate. Nuclear fractures, familial disasters, armed with silence, surrounded by never-ending violence. Haven't we had enough? Faking like we're fine, struggling in pride, told to hide our wounds inside. Self-inflicted crimes, the deepest roots. Admiral abolitionist writer, wells of information filled her books on a crusade for justice, fighting to resist before a balled up fist. Truth of liberation, asphyxiation. We are the seeds from strange fruit, lemon trees in the summer breeze hemorrhaging from the root. Under leaves of ignorance, our minds assassinated, our souls kidnapped, our bodies raped. There is no escape from the scars, this skin. When can we begin to heal, to feel, to just be free? In the cage where birds wish to sing, Harriet, Ida, Billy, Nina, shape-shifting trauma into triumph. Gardenias bloom across the street. Cope or heal. Ultimately, it's all about how you deal. The deepest roots hold the darkest storms. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you very much, Ali, for what you shared and centering us and connecting us as well to our ancestors, our paths, and each other. And you can see there was a lot of love and appreciation from the group for what you shared. It is also my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today, Dr. Dana M. Emerson. Dana Emerson was born and raised in Los Angeles, California, and she received an Associate of Arts degree from El Camino College and a Bachelor's of Arts and Master's of Arts from California State University at Northridge. She earned a PhD in adult and higher education with a focus in leadership from Oregon State University. Her area of research is student success, focusing on African-American males in community college, resulting in disrupting the definition of student success used in higher education. Dana holds several certifications in conflict resolution, facilitation, and family law dispute resolution. In 1999, she started Neutral Ground Mediation and Consulting, and in that role aids in the resolution of internal organizational conflicts, including those in the community, by addressing cultural, justice, and communication issues. She trains individuals and groups in conflict resolution and management strategies, utilizing effective communication to address diversity, equity, and inclusion awareness. In 2005, Dana moved to Oregon and began teaching communication at Lynn Benton Community College, where she held the positions of department chair, chair of academic affairs, chair of the Diversity and Civic Engagement Council, chair of the Faculty Senate, and president-elect of the Faculty Association. In the Pacific Northwest, Dana's diversity, equity, and inclusion work continued as a consultant to the Human Relations Commission and is one of the founders and educators of the Visioning Organizations as Inclusive Communities and Equitable Spaces, or Voices Project at Portland Community College, and with facilitating sustained dialogues on race relations and gender communication. In addition to publishing 3 textbooks for Lynn Benton and other community colleges, Dana has worked with Oregon State University, the Oregon Department of Education, the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office, the Housing Authority of Los Angeles County, and Tyra Banks's T-Zone project. Most recently, she has collaborated with the Circle of Leadership, the American Association of Women in Community Colleges, and the California State Umoja Community. Prior to teaching in Oregon, Dana taught at El Camino College and other universities and institutions in California, and she returned to California in 2015 to lead a college campus in the Coast Community College District. Here, Dr. Emerson continues consulting and coaching community and higher education organizations in communication, competency, leadership, diversity, equity, inclusion, and goal attainment. She works with individuals, families, organizations, and colleges in California, Illinois, Mississippi, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington, providing instruction and discussion on strategies to improve communication, effective decision-making, and planning skills and strategies. And in the spirit of giving back, she created a textbook grant from the royalties of the textbooks that she has published and endowed a scholarship for Latinx students, the Emerson Fuentes Scholarship. For all of her work, Dr. Emerson has received numerous awards, such as the William C. Hobbs Award for Outstanding Adult Mediator of the Year in Los Angeles County, the California State Assembly Certificate of Recognition for Interpersonal Communication and Family Mediation Skills and Services, Instructor of Great Influence at El Camino College for Speech Communication, and has been identified as Education Manager of the Year in multiple years. Dr. Emerson also has been honored by the NAACP for her commitment to diversity and student engagement in higher education. Dana's core belief is that we all need someone in our corner, on our team, that will help and support us to be the most successful people we can be. And that is why her tagline is 98% of success is support. I've got your back. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Dr. Dana Emerson to share with us a bit about emancipation and freedom, with a particular focus on interrupting the pipeline to incarceration.
Thank you so much. Well, you make me sound so good. I appreciate it. Thank you all. And good afternoon to everyone. And before we begin, I'd like to say that this is the weekend that leads up to Juneteenth, but it also is the weekend that leads up to Father's Day. And I want to just say one, thank you to all the fathers for being there, for supporting all of us. Obviously, we can't do it without you either. 98% of success is support, and I know that you have our backs. And then Juneteenth, we're going to talk about that. So I am Dr. Dana Emerson. I am a Dean of Instruction in Orange County, California, and I'm here today to talk about emancipation, education, and interrupting the pipeline to incarceration. What I'd like to do today is really just interrogate the entire pipeline system by really examining emancipation and what does that mean. So let's move on to the next slide so we can get a look at our agenda. Here's what we're going to do today. We'll talk about the emancipation timeline. We'll then go into looking at the pipeline and the 2 pathways that students generally enter the pipeline. We will also then go and connect those Black codes to student codes of conduct, which surprisingly have a very significant role in the pipeline. And then we'll discuss strategies for interrupting the pipeline. So let's go to the next slide. From emancipation, this is where we are going to start. Next slide. Emancipation is filled with disparities in the history of the United States. We have Juneteenth, but what we also have, and what is not discussed very often, is Emancipation Day, that occurs on April 16th. So on April 16th in 1862, 3,000 plus slaves were freed in the DC area. This happened 8 months prior to the proclamation being offered and signed by President Lincoln. What's unique about the Emancipation Day and how it only applied to the DC area is that this was the first time that the government actually paid slave owners to free their enslaved property, meaning us. At that time, slaves, enslaved people, were worth $300 per, with exceptions. The exceptions included minors, so no children were paid for, married women were not paid for, and anyone with an emotional or mental disability, they were not paid for. In the United States, we followed what was happening in the UK as they began their transition to abolish enslavement. This is exactly the pathway that they took. So we have Emancipation Day. Let's move on to the next slide. Then we have the Emancipation Proclamation. Now remember, Emancipation Day is in April and happened in 1862, but the Emancipation Proclamation didn't really take effect until January of 1863. And this was supposedly the end of slavery, meaning all enslaved people would be free from bondage and be able to move about the world or their space or the environment in ways that they've chosen. But we also know that's not true, because with all those disparities, we still have Juneteenth. Next slide. So Juneteenth is exactly what Dr. Stanbeck-Stroud alluded to in the opening, and that this is the day that the word got to the slaves in Galveston, Texas, that the proclamation had already been issued back in 1863, but they're only getting the word in 1865. And the question is always, well, why? What was the delay? Well, there was a lot that was part of this delay. One, obviously, the slave owners did not want the enslaved people to be free. They had more money to earn. And the best way that they could do that was to keep the enslaved people working for absolutely no money and making money for them. Two, the Union forces were very much caught up in trying to maneuver their way through what was left after the Civil War. And, you know, kind of like snail mail, the message just got there late. But Juneteenth did eventually happen. Next slide. So in 1865, Major General Granger delivers General Order Number 3. And this is what then allows for Juneteenth to happen. But I want to, again, focus on this interrogation of the meaning of emancipation, because what happened with the General Order is what I have here on this slide. They, meaning the enslaved individuals, were informed that they would not be allowed to come together to collect at military posts, and that they would not be supported in their idleness, wherever that may be. So what this basically says is that, yes, you have been freed. However, you cannot join in a collective way. You cannot assemble as a group. And that if you are caught just idling around because you don't have a job, then this will also not be supported. Now, I just ask, what were these formerly enslaved people to do once they got word that they were free or emancipated? Where were they supposed to go? Some did actually leave, although the order number 3 said, please stay. Matter of fact, order number 3 said, not only to please stay, it said, please stay at your place of employment and ask for wages, which is laughable. But this is what being emancipated was all about. So I offered this because when we were enslaved, there were slave codes that kept us in place, meaning they didn't allow us to do the things that other human beings could do. Next slide. So here we have an example of what the slave codes did and didn't do, right? The slave codes versus the Black codes. So slave codes happened before the Civil War, and then the Black codes happened after the Civil War. And what you can see is that they're not that far apart in terms of restrictions and limitations. Just as we noted in General Order number 3, we're free, but free with limitations, which causes us to question what freedom really means. So with this picture of these beautiful ancestors here picking cotton, we have to ask, were these enslaved people or were these freedmen or freed people as we know it via the Emancipation? It's not very clear because their limitations technically kept them in the same space doing the same types of things. Next slide. Until the 13th Amendment, which a lot of people believe the 13th Amendment actually just abolished slavery altogether. But as Dr. Stanback-Stroud noted in her welcoming, it didn't really do that. What it really did was offer up a different way to enslave people. Now people can be enslaved, right, as punishment, as if Black folks weren't punished enough already. Next slide. So through the interrogation, here it is. Let's look at these definitions. And I'm going to give you a second just to kind of read over them as I go through them. The definition of emancipation is the fact or process of being set free from legal, social, or political restrictions. This is liberation, the freeing of someone from slavery. Now, again, set free from restrictions, giving the liberation. So let's then look at the definition of free. When free is a verb, it means to release from captivity or confinement or slavery. But free as an adjective means not or no longer confined or imprisoned, not under the control or in the power of another, but would be able to act or be done as one wishes. The freedman or freed woman, and I asterisk that because women were not acknowledged, as I pointed out back in Emancipation Day, married women were not even considered part of the package. But these are formerly enslaved Black people who have been released from slavery by legal means. Now, with all of this information here and everything that we know, Emancipation Day, Emancipation Proclamation, Emancipation celebrations, Juneteenth celebrations, freedom, freed men, are we truly free? And this was a question that Dr. Stanback-Stroud also presented. We thought the 13th Amendment was actually going to give us freedom, but what it really did was just give us a different avenue to be enslaved. So I ask again, are Black folks really free? And I'd like you to hold on to that idea as we move into the next part of this presentation, as we start to look at that pipeline. So now we're looking at education. Next slide. Thank you. So here is the history of the pipeline. Back in the 80s, we had some turbulent times. There were some juvenile arrests. And so this is when we started seeing more punishment coming into our K-12 system, into the schools. And if we look at how these things are defined, right, they're violent crimes resulting in the perception that adolescents were becoming viciously dangerous. Or in the second one, right, juveniles were wilding, right, being violent and unmanageable, which required the federal government to put policies into place like the Gun Free School Act. Now, I want to stop here for just a second because it's really funny to me when we talk about how the pipeline got started, and it was all really based on somebody needing to take care of these crazy, violent, wilding teenagers that were spending so much of their time in school. I'm just going to let you sit on that one for a second. But also, as we look back through history, when we think of needing a gun-free school, who are we really trying to protect ourselves from? Who are really these viciously violent individuals that we need federal acts of protection from? Now, we can guess who, although they are not named. We can always assume that these were not white children that we were talking about. Matter of fact, the term wilding was definitely used when a group of young boys in New York were falsely accused of raping a woman, and this is what they called wilding. So we can guess who these acts were for. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the pipeline, we talk about two ways of entering the pipeline. There's an indirect pathway and a direct pathway. The indirect pathway, the indirect pathway is really about school suspensions, right? This is when students are moved away from their learning environment because someone deemed that whatever behavior they were exhibiting was no longer reasonable in school and could have the potential of creating a viciously dangerous situation. So these students needed to be removed from the learning environment because we all know how vicious children are when they're in school. So the indirect pathway, let me just give you a little bit of information here. The Gun Free School Act encouraged schools to adopt what's called a zero tolerance policy. And this is a model to address students who brought guns to school. However, it eventually evolved to targeting a broad spectrum of behaviors. It created frameworks for schools to implement severe punishments and disciplinary actions without any understanding of where those behaviors come from or the settings in which those behaviors occurred. Many schools employed what they called preventative detention, which basically means they excluded the children from school and basically asked them to figure out how to learn on their own because they were not ready to be part of the school work. So how then is zero tolerance enforced? Just stay here on this slide for a minute, right? Interestingly, zero tolerance is the law. Schools who did not enact a zero tolerance policy were in a state to lose their funding. So even if the leadership of the K-12 system thought this is not a good idea for us, they had no choice if they wanted to continue to receive funding from the federal government. So how are they enforcing the zero tolerance? It's the law, and this is what they're doing. So now let's talk about direct pathways. Please stay here on this slide. So the direct pathway into the pipeline is through school-based police officers. So back in the 90s, again, we saw an increase of school-based police officers, also known as SROs, right? They like to clean it up for us. They're student resource officers, but they're police officers in elementary, middle, and high schools. And they were there to address disciplinary concerns that were traditionally handled by school staff, but now they are directly handled by these SROs that again, use punitive and physical methods to de-escalate behaviors. Now let's talk about what an SRO is, and let's stay here too. An SRO is a certified law enforcement officer hired by a local law enforcement agency to provide law enforcement and security services to public elementary and secondary schools. Let me give you a little bit of history. The first SRO was documented in 1953 in Flint, Michigan. And this police officer was put into the school to improve the relationships between the police and the youth. Again, right? The police really wanted the youth to not fear them. And so they thought, well, what a great way to do this is by putting police officers in school. In the 1950s and 60s, police then were on campuses to suppress student-led movements against inequality and racial discrimination. And in the 1970s, police were spread to other localities and other school districts. And by 1972, 40 states had police in their schools by 1972. Over time, the role of these student resource officers, let's just call them the police in school, diverged from their initial purpose of improving the police-student relationship and led to the overt criminalization of student behavior, right? And with this, we saw the increase of the rates of suspensions, expulsions, and school-based arrests. Hence, the two pathways into the pipeline, arrest and suspensions. Next slide, please. So I bring this up again to also talk about Black codes and student codes of conduct. Now remember, we talked a little bit about how everything about being emancipated was supposed to be about liberation and freedom, freedom to do and act as you wish, except that's not exactly what happened. Everything that happened since the emancipation and before, honestly, was about controlling the behaviors of Black people, and particularly the behaviors that white people defined as undesirable. Not only were these behaviors in the field, when we were enslaved, but through time, that same mindset moved into the school system. After school shootings became a thing, meaning that the adolescents were becoming vicious and violent, except those people that were doing all those school shootings were not Black people. But we will talk about that. Zero tolerance comes into play. And again, it is you must enact it or you will lose your funding. So with the Black codes, and I say this, Black codes to zero tolerance school codes is where we are right now. Researchers have found that suspensions and expulsions are typically ineffective in behavior modification, and they are often detrimental to academic achievement and well-being of all students. Now, remember again, everything about these codes were about behavior modification, change or control or limit the behavior of Black people, whether they were enslaved Black people, emancipated Black people, and now Black people in schools. Despite the research, suspension and expulsions continue to be the immediate option to reprimand unwanted behaviors. And students of color, particularly students of color with disabilities, are disproportionately targeted. Now, I want to make sure that we understand why we're bringing up the students with disabilities, because we're not necessarily just saying physical or visible disabilities. We're also talking about mental and emotional disabilities. And remember, back in Emancipation Day, those were the those were the people who had no value placed on them. Remember, the government paid the slave owners to release their enslaved people. Those were the ones who had a value placed on them. They were the valuable chattel, except those who had mental and emotional disabilities. Researchers indicate that Black youth are often penalized for school-related offenses that are subjective rather than objective. There's a study in 2019 where researchers found that Black girls in particular were more likely referred to the office for perceptions of negative behavior. Oh, yes, for negative behavior and defiant attitudes, about disobedience, again, about controlling their behavior. Let's move on to the next slide. So what happens when the codes are violated? When the Black codes were violated, we can see individuals risk being taken into custody, being fined, they risk surrendering all their wages. But what happens when students violate the school codes? They risk being suspended, they risk being referred to law enforcement, they risk being physically beaten. You can see the parallels here, the similarities between the Black codes and the student codes. Next slide, please. So how do we interrupt the pipeline? Next slide. First, we need to recognize that the pipeline's been here for a long time. Here's a picture from 1903. These young boys were more than likely victims of what was called the Apprenticeship Act, meaning their parents were no longer available for them. So because they were idle, they were imprisoned. Next slide. And we also need to know where our resources go. Next slide. We also need to be aware of what is happening to us in terms of facts. Next slide. Here is what it is, education, not incarceration. Next slide. Again, we need to break the chains, break the bonds. Next slide, please. And thank you. We must move from incarceration and really focus on education. Thank you.
That was very powerful. Thank you so much, Dana. Wow. Questions, there's lots of stuff coming in the chat. Send your applause. This was really, really informative for me as well. And so the thing that we want you all to do is put some questions chat or unmute yourself and ask questions of Dana. And how can we actually apply this within our school district, in our classroom, if you're a faculty on here. And so while I think we're out of time, right? So I'm going to pass the baton on to Dr. BJ Snowden to close us out. And if you have questions for Dana, just send her an email. I will put it in the chat. Send TBD an email as well. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. And Dr. Emerson, thank you so much for the stimulating conversation. And thank you all for taking time out of your Friday to meet with us today. This event is hosted by an organization called The Village Demands, and we wanted to take a moment to let you know a little bit more about the organization and say that while we have contacted every college in our state system about membership, it is imperative that individuals on the campuses bring the knowledge of this group forward. So I've added to the chat to everyone the actual website for the Village Demands. I would ask you to work and connect with your local leadership and make sure that the commitment to African-American student success and the wellness of Black faculty and staff is shown through a commitment of membership. I am also excited to represent on the board of the Village Demands and think that this organization is really going to continue to make substantive change in the way that we address the inequities in our work. So thank you for that again. I want to overall say to all the presenters, it has been amazing to hear this. Thank you so much, Allie Jones. Thank you so much, Dr. Jamal Cooks. And thank you so much, Dr. Regina Stanback-Stroud, for your open, this is why we are together. This is community in real life and breathing and living energy. So have a fantastic weekend, have a fantastic Juneteenth, and thank you so much for attending.
Thank you all.